Trevor Noah just got up and left. On live TV, Karoline Leavitt read out his own words, and the studio froze. It was no joke. It was Payback Live. On a crisp autumn evening, millions of viewers across the nation tuned in to a highly anticipated political broadcast on national television. The special report was billed as a deep dive into media bias and the boundaries of freedom of speech, a subject that had become increasingly charged in today's polarized climate. Tonight's program promised nothing less than a lively, thought-provoking debate on the role of humor in politics, a topic that cut to the very core of contemporary discourse. The broadcast opened with a series of bold graphics flashing intricate headlines about the media's influence, social media trends, and the mounting controversies over satirical commentary. Accompanied by a stirring musical score, the visuals set the stage for what was expected to be a civilized, incisive conversation. The camera slowly panned over a sleek, modern TV studio, where an engaging set had been meticulously arranged. Two polished desks flanked by large monitors displaying live social media reactions, and a backdrop that cleverly combined patriotic hues with symbols of free speech. Seated at one desk was Karoline Leavitt, the renowned White House press secretary known for her measured tone and sharp intellect. Dressed in a tailored navy suit accented with a discreet red pin, a subtle nod to both authority and compassion, Karoline exuded confidence and grace. Her impeccable reputation for handling the press with both candor and calm had made her one of the most trusted figures in government communication. Yet behind her poised exterior was a woman who carried the solemn responsibility of defending truth and accountability in a turbulent media landscape. Opposite her sat Trevor Noah, the celebrated television host who had built his fame on a potent blend of biting sarcasm and razor-sharp wit. His style was irreverent and fearless, qualities that had garnered him both staunch admirers and vociferous detractors. Clad in a smart casual blazer and sporting an engaging, almost mischievous smile, Trevor was known for his ability to deliver even the most controversial quips with a touch of humor that often blurred the line between satire and mockery. Over the years, his jabs and offhand remarks had sparked numerous debates, especially when they strayed into territory that some felt insulted veterans, religious communities, and conservative audiences. The moderator of the evening, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for incisive questioning, set the tone by introducing the central question of the night. What is the role of humor in politics, and where should we draw the line between free expression and offense? His measured voice resonated through the studio as he recounted recent incidents of provocative satire and pointed controversies that had rocked public opinion. The introduction was not only a call to intellectual arms but also a reminder of the profound impact that words and jokes could have in shaping national narratives. As the cameras rolled live, the studio audience, a mix of dignitaries, influencers, and everyday citizens, sat in expectant silence. Experts and critics alike speculated about the unfolding exchange, some confident that Karoline's steadfast decorum would keep the discussion grounded, others predictably wary that Trevor's sardonic humor would soon draw fire for its unfiltered edge. Almost immediately, the air in the studio crackled with energy as Trevor launched into his trademark opening remarks. With a subtle, sardonic smile, he quipped, "If you can't laugh at the absurdity of our media, then at least we can laugh at it together." His comment, light and seemingly offhand, elicited a few chuckles from the audience and quick retorts from social media followers. Yet, unbeknownst to many in the studio, this was merely the opening salvo in what would soon escalate into a storm of revelations. Karoline listened intently to Trevor's remarks, her expression calm but her eyes reflecting a wealth of unspoken thoughts. She had prepared meticulously for this talk, aware of the fine balance between open debate and the responsibility of safeguarding the dignity of those who might be inadvertently maligned by careless humor. Her mind drifted, as it often did when honing in on the subject, to instances in past speeches and interviews when controversial jokes had crossed a line, when the relentless quips had struck at the heart of communities, including brave veterans who had sacrificed for their country, devout believers seeking solace in their faith, and conservative voices that felt increasingly marginalized. The moderator then smoothly segued into the first formal question. Karoline, as a representative of the White House, how do you view the current state of political humor, and do you believe there are lines that should never be crossed? Karoline took a measured breath before responding, her voice imbued with both authority and compassion. Humor is a powerful tool, she began. One that can illuminate truths, challenge power structures, and foster dialogue. But it must always be wielded responsibly. When humor begins to target those who have already sacrificed, when it diminishes hard-won values or publicly belittles our veterans and devout citizens, we must re-examine where we draw the line between free speech and harmful rhetoric. Her answer elicited murmurs of agreement from parts of the audience, while others leaned forward, anticipating how Trevor might retort. The stage was set, and the conversation had taken a serious turn as Karoline's words resonated with an underlying fervor that promised more than just a lighthearted debate. It was a call for accountability and respect. As the broadcast advanced into its opening segment, the seeds of tension that had been sown earlier began to stir subtly. The anticipation in the studio was matched by the quiet hum of digital activity from viewers at home, who were already primed to dissect every word and gesture. In this initial moment, it was clear that tonight's debate would transcend mere rhetorical flourish. It was destined to become a landmark discussion on the delicate interplay between humor and the sanctity of public discourse. A dialogue that many hoped would redefine the responsibilities of public figures in an era when every word carried monumental weight. The debate began with the kind of energy that promised sparks. Trevor Noah, ever the provocateur, leaned back in his chair with a casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. His opening remarks were peppered with his trademark humor, a blend of sharp wit and subtle jabs that elicited chuckles from the audience. "You know," he said, his grin widening, "politics is like a bad sitcom, except the jokes write themselves and nobody gets canceled. Well, except me, apparently." The audience laughed, and Trevor basked in the moment, his charisma filling the room. Karoline Leavitt, seated across from him, maintained her composure. Her expression was calm, her posture upright, and her eyes focused. She had prepared for this moment, knowing full well that Trevor's humor could be disarming but also dangerously dismissive. She waited patiently for her turn to speak, her hands resting lightly on the desk as she listened to Trevor's quips. The moderator, sensing the tension simmering beneath the surface, posed the first question. "Trevor, you've often used humor to critique political figures and societal norms. Do you believe there's a line that shouldn't be crossed? Or is everything fair game in the name of satire?" Trevor's response was immediate, his tone light but pointed. "Look, humor is the last bastion of truth. If we start drawing lines, we'll end up with a world where comedians are afraid to make jokes about anything. And let's be honest, the people who get offended the most are usually the ones who need to laugh the hardest." The audience chuckled again, but Karoline's expression remained unchanged. When the moderator turned to her, she leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and deliberate. "Humor is indeed a powerful tool," she began, "but it's also a responsibility. When humor targets those who have already sacrificed, our veterans, our faith communities, or those who feel marginalized, it stops being satire and starts being cruelty. And cruelty, Trevor, is never funny." The room grew quieter, the audience sensing the shift in tone. Trevor, unfazed, smirked and replied, "Well, Karoline, if we're going to talk about sacrifice, let's not forget that humor itself is a sacrifice. I mean, I've sacrificed my reputation just to make people laugh. Isn't that worth something?" Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she responded with a calm intensity that cut through the room. "Sacrificing your reputation for a laugh is not the same as sacrificing your life for your country. And when you make jokes about veterans who've lost their limbs in combat, you're not sacrificing anything. You're exploiting their pain for a cheap laugh." The audience shifted in their seats, the laughter fading into an uneasy silence. Trevor's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, attempting to deflect with another joke. "Well, Karoline, I guess I should start writing jokes about press secretaries. You know, the ones who sacrifice their credibility every time they step up to the podium." The audience chuckled nervously, but Karoline didn't take the bait. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "You can joke about me all you want, Trevor. But when your humor crosses the line into mocking those who've already endured unimaginable hardship, it's not satire, it's weakness." The silence in the room was palpable. Trevor's grin faded, replaced by a flicker of discomfort. The audience, sensing the gravity of Karoline's words, remained quiet, their attention fixed on the unfolding exchange. The moderator, caught off guard by the intensity of the moment, hesitated before moving to the next question. The conversation had simmered just beneath the surface, its brisk exchanges laced with light-hearted jabs and playful banter. But then, in a moment that shifted the very energy of the room, Karoline Leavitt's gaze grew steady and resolute. Without pause, she leaned forward and, with the calm authority of someone who had prepared for this turning point all along, began to recite a series of statements recorded from Trevor's past public appearances. A litany of words that, taken in context, had long been considered laughing matter by his supporters but were now coming back to haunt him. "Trevor," Karoline said, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the studio like a clarion call. "You have often claimed that humor serves as the lamp that illuminates truth even in the darkest corridors of politics. But let's revisit some uncovered moments from your earlier career." The studio cameras zoomed in on her face. Clear, unflinching, every line of her expression precise and measured. She continued, her tone even yet laden with palpable conviction. "There was a time when, during one of your more raucous stand-up routines, you remarked, 'It's funny how our veteran heroes, who lost their legs in Afghanistan, merely serve as punching bags for our jokes.'" The studio fell into a heavy silence. The floor, which had once vibrated with the soft laughter at Trevor's quips, now seemed to absorb every syllable as if it were a sacred indictment. Karoline's words hung in the air. Humor, when it chooses to ridicule the sacrifices of those who have bled for this country, becomes not a tool of liberation, but an instrument of deep, unaddressed weakness. Her voice did not waver as she proceeded to dig deeper, pressing on with incontrovertible evidence. "And if I may recall another instance, a segment aired on a talk show that you hosted, when you made offhand remarks dismissing the spiritual struggles of your religious viewers as a crutch for the weak-minded." Karoline's tone sharpened even further. "Is that truly the mark of satire? Or is it the mark of someone who finds it easier to laugh at the most vulnerable among us, rather than confront the complexities of empathy?" The studio audience, which had been casually entertained just moments before, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The air grew heavy with tension, punctuated only by the distant sound of production assistants whispering and the subtle scraping of chairs. Phones began to be discreetly raised. A few viewers in the front row exchanged glances that told of their dawning realization. Here, on live television, and every woman from the White House was not only challenging the notion of free speech but was meticulously unspooling a record of words said in the name of humor. Trevor Noah, sitting across from Karoline, visibly tensed. His earlier confident, almost mischievous grin faltered, replaced by a more guarded expression. He fumbled briefly with his water glass as if searching for a retort, but found none. The moderator, a veteran of these debates, tried in vain to interject with a neutral query, but the moment had passed. The weight of Karoline's evidence had taken hold. Drawing a deep, measured breath, Karoline turned slightly to address not only Trevor, but the entire television audience. "You have the right to be witty," she acknowledged softly, "but wit built on the pain of our veterans, on the unyielding struggles of those who hold fast to their beliefs in times of crisis, is no longer mere satire. It is a denial of our shared humanity." In a moment that seemed to crystallize every critical viewpoint of the nation's disillusioned citizens, she declared, "One may be witty, but when you joke about warriors who lost their legs in Afghanistan, that is no longer humor. That is a weakness of character and of conscience." At her words, the studio plunged into an almost tangible silence. The cameras swept over the faces of the live audience, expressions ranging from shock to somber reflection. The previously jovial atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an unspoken realization that something profound and perhaps irreversible was unfolding before their eyes. Trevor's attempts to deflect with further sarcasm were met with deafening stillness. Every clever quip he had once wielded so effectively now seemed tarnished by Karoline's incisive quoting. A visible bead of sweat glistened on his brow as he struggled to re-establish his earlier control. The weight of the historic record of his past incendiary comments bore down on him, and for the first time in his career, his well-practiced persona was on the defensive. Clips of Karoline's direct quotes soon began circulating online, each one dissected frame by frame, shared with the fervor of a digital revolution. Viewers across the nation now watched, rapt and divided, as the public debate shifted from political sparring to a moment of reckoning for free speech versus responsibility. As the silence stretched on, Karoline's calm gaze swept across the room once more. "This is not an attack on humor as an art form," she said quietly, "but a call to accountability for those in positions of influence. Our words shape perceptions and, ultimately, the lives of those we claim to represent." Her statement resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom began nodding slowly, their previously buoyant mood replaced by reflective seriousness. The moderator, sensing the transformative energy of the moment, attempted to steer the conversation back into more civilized territory. But the atmosphere in the studio had irrevocably changed, and there was no denying that Karoline had forced a turning point. In that charged silence, every viewer, whether in the studio or millions watching live at home, was confronted with the stark reality. With great freedom comes even greater responsibility. The charged silence that followed Karoline's pointed revelations hung over the studio like a dense fog, a stillness that neither laughter nor clamor could penetrate. For a few agonizing heartbeats, the debate seemed to be caught in a moment of reckoning, as if the very air recognized the gravity of words that had been stoked by the past and set aflame by truth. It was in that suspended instant that Trevor Noah, whose world had always been orchestrated through the language of levity and irreverence, searched his inner reserves for a way to dismiss what had just been laid bare. Trevor's initial instinct was to rise from his seat, an attempt to reclaim the stage of irreverence that had so often defined his persona. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying a hint of defiance as he attempted to steer the conversation back into his familiar terrain. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he began with a practiced smirk that faltered under the weight of the somber expressions in the room, "if we're to dissect every word I've uttered in the name of humor, then surely—" His attempted quip was immediately strangled by the palpable atmosphere. The studio, once ready to laugh along with his jests, had collectively withdrawn its mirth, leaving him exposed and perplexed. In a bid to lighten the moment, Trevor tried to inject a self-deprecating remark. "I mean, maybe I was too edgy," he said, running his hands through his hair, his tone layered with a forced nonchalance. "After all, isn't it the risk-taker's greatest accomplishment to make a joke at one's own expense?" He tossed out the line as if it could somehow dilute the sting of Karoline's evidence. But every syllable seemed to echo unanswered, the audience's eyes fixed on him in a stark, unimpressed glare. The silence was so complete that even the studio's usual hum of background chatter and soft instrumental music felt like a distant memory. Karoline, still seated and unwavering, allowed her gaze to sweep the room. She noted the heavy hearts, the downturned eyes, and the lingering discomfort on faces that had once freely cheered at Trevor's offhand humor. The moderator's voice, usually so practiced at channeling false equilibrium into the debate, faltered in its attempts to smooth over the rupture. "I think we must address the concerns raised here today," the moderator interjected haltingly, only to be drowned out by the vacuum of sound, a collective refusal by the audience to accept further deflection. Trevor's attempt to rally a laugh was met with only a few scattered coughs and the rustling of programs as viewers sat raptly in their seats. His attempt to dismiss the matter as just a joke now dissolved into an awkward mutter, as if he was trying to convince himself rather than the crowd. With each passing second, the realization dawned upon him that his usual arsenal of biting wit and clever tracking had been rendered impotent by the raw truth that Karoline had so patiently laid before them. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting between the moderator's pleading look and Karoline's unyielding stare. In a moment of visible vulnerability, he reached for his microphone as if to launch one final salvo of repartee. But the microphone remained his only companion in that moment of self-defensive isolation. No sharp punchline, no quip about accidental victims or misguided satire could heal the breach that had been opened. The audience, which had once thrived on his quick-witted repartee, now seemed locked in a vigil of moral solemnity. Their silence was not mere absence of noise. It was an active, collective repudiation. It was as if each member of the viewing public refused to condone the dismissal of suffering wrapped in the guise of humor. For a long, uncomfortably stretched moment, Trevor's eyes glistened with the dawning understanding that his words held less sway when the truth was laid bare like an open wound. In that charged space, the studio lights felt harsher, the background decor less forgiving, as if the entire environment had shifted, demanding accountability over amusement. He tried once more, his voice softer now, laced with a tinge of regret. Maybe I've always taken the easy way out, poking fun at the difficult, rather than facing the hard questions head-on. Yet even this admission, delivered with a hint of remorse, failed to draw any empathetic nod or supportive murmur from the silent throng. The moderator, sensing that the balance of the debate had irretrievably swung, attempted one final interjection. "Trevor, perhaps we should move on." But his words died in the heavy air, as viewers in the studio and at home digested the implications of Karoline's demands for responsibility and decency. In that crucible of vulnerability, the multifaceted power of words was revealed. In an era where humor could once easily gloss over unpalatable truths, the collective resolve of an attentive, morally awakened public could render even the most practiced jester mute. Trevor's attempts at belittling his past statements had backfired spectacularly in that moment. A moment when words were not tools for amusement but instruments of accountability, cutting through the fog of insensitivity with the precision of truth. As the minutes ticked by with the silence in the studio deepening into an almost tangible presence, it became clear that Trevor had reached his limit. His deflections had faded, leaving behind only the stark reality that his humor, which once thrived on irreverence, had now been exposed for what it was, an act of weakness masquerading as wit. The moderator's subtle glance, the collective quiet of the audience, and Karoline's resolute gaze all told a single, unspoken message. Humor, when detached from empathy and decency, loses its power entirely. The electric tension in the studio reached a critical juncture as the air grew thick with unspoken disapproval. Trevor Noah, once the master of barbed quips and irreverent jabs, now appeared visibly rattled. His earlier attempts at playful deflection had disintegrated into halting, stammering rebuttals that served only to underscore the gravity of Karoline Leavitt's charges. The moderator's earlier suggestions to proceed gently were drowned in the now oppressive silence that blanketed the room. A silence that was not simply the absence of sound but a profound, collective disapproval. For several agonizing seconds, Trevor's eyes darted around the studio. The glow of the set lights seemed to reveal every line of worry on his face. His practiced grin was gone, replaced by an anguished frown. In that moment of vulnerability, the wall constructed by years of confidence and practiced humor began to crumble. Every sarcastic retort and slick comeback he had once delivered with ease now trapped in his throat, as if the truth itself had rendered him mute. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, the symbol of a man caught off guard by his inner turmoil. His hands, usually so steady as they casually gestured in sync with his jokes, now trembled slightly as he clutched the cold, hard surface of the table. He paused, longer than anyone could have anticipated, as if searching for a remnant of the defiant bravado that had defined him. But instead of finding solace in humor, he found that every word he once uttered now lay bare, weaponized against his own credibility. With the studio audience watching in hushed, anxious silence, the pressure became unbearable. In a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Trevor's voice began to break. He managed. His words reduced to a weak whisper that carried the sting of regret and despair. The moderator's eyes widened in alarm, unsure whether to intervene or allow the scene to unfold as it was. The cameras captured every quiver, every lapse in composure, as if immortalizing the collapse of a once-celebrated persona. Unable to bear the weight of the mounting truth or the piercing scrutiny of millions, Trevor's composure shattered completely. His face reddened, and in a final, desperate attempt to salvage his public image, he reached out for the microphone with shaking hands. But instead of a defiant retort, his expression contorted with conflicting emotions. A swirl of anger at himself, sorrow for his past insensitive remarks, and almost palpable despair at the realization that his humor had crossed a line irretrievably. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with a mixture of disbelief and empathy. Then, unexpectedly, Trevor pushed back his chair with a force that reverberated through the studio. He rose abruptly, nearly stumbling as he stood. His eyes, which had once gleamed with mischief when delivering his signature sarcasm, now shone with the unmistakable look of a man who had just reached his breaking point. In one charged, heart-wrenching moment, he muttered, "I cannot do this anymore," his voice trembling as if rejecting not only the burden of his past behavior, but the very idea of trivializing real pain. At that moment, the cameras captured the rawness of his dissent. In an unedited, gut-wrenching sequence, Trevor snatched the microphone from its cradle on his desk. His hand hovered over it as if it were both a tool of empowerment and a relic of the persona he was desperately trying to shed. With a final, pained glance toward Karoline, a look that seemed to silently acknowledge her unyielding truth, he abruptly turned and strode from the set. The studio lights, once bright and unwavering, seemed to dim as he walked off the stage, leaving behind an echo of his retreating footsteps that reverberated in the stunned silence. The air in the studio was electric with shock. The moderator's voice, now barely audible, attempted to call for order. "Please, everyone, remain calm." But his words were lost amid the collective gasp of the audience and the heightened murmur on social media. Behind the scenes, the director and production crew exchanged desperate, frantic glances. The teleprompter froze on Karoline's solemn face, and technical assistants fumbled with their headsets. The director, in particular, was visibly rattled, unable to reconcile the breakdown of a man who had long carried the banner of audacious humor, now humbled and defeated before a live audience. Outside the studio, the first signs of chaos began to ripple through the digital sphere. News alerts erupted on social media platforms. Clips of Trevor's final moments, his pained expression, his trembling hands, and that final, resolute step off the set, flooded the internet. Audiences who had once adored Trevor's sardonic wit now found themselves in a state of conflicted introspection, questioning the fine line between humor and insensitivity. Inside the studio, the director's confusion was palpable. With a furrowed brow and a persistently trembling voice, he reached for his headset to address the crisis. We need to cut to a commercial break immediately," he stammered. His command met with anxious nods from the technical staff. The studio crew scrambled to regain control, the hum of urgent whispers filling the backstage area as monitors displayed scrolling social media feeds brimming with outrage, disappointment, and a glimmer of vindication. But in that bewildered moment, the gravity of the situation transcended any attempt to immediately manage the fallout. The truth, sharp, unyielding, and entirely public, had already left an indelible mark on the discourse of that evening. Trevor's exit was not just a retreat from the camera, it was a symbol, an unexpected, painful reckoning with the consequences of words that had long been sanitized under the guise of humor. The studio, now a microcosm of a nation grappling with the responsibilities of free speech, braced itself for the aftermath of a moment that would inevitably fuel debates for days to come. In the silence that followed his exit, as the production team struggled to reassemble the fractured broadcast, one undeniable truth remained resonant in every mind. There is a limit to what can be joked about, and when that limit is breached, the pain inflicted is irreversible. In the immediate aftermath of the broadcast, the studio's dramatic silence was replaced by a virtual cacophony. Social media platforms exploded with activity as viewers, pundits, and ordinary citizens alike began to dissect the events of the evening. Video clips of Trevor Noah's final moments, his trembling hands, that pained expression as he reached for the microphone, and his abrupt exit, were snipped, looped, and shared across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and emerging platforms. Within minutes, major news outlets began covering the live incident with breathless urgency. Commentators on cable news, radio talk shows, and online video blogs echoed the sentiments of the studio's stunned silence. Editorial teams and opinion columnists wrote pieces questioning the very boundaries of humor and free speech, debating whether the razor-thin line once drawn between satire and insensitivity had been irrevocably blurred. Images of Karoline Leavitt's calm, resolute face were juxtaposed against the memorabilia of Trevor's past controversies and his unsparing words, each frame scrutinized as if it could offer definitive proof of a moral decline in today's media culture. Across the digital landscape, memes and reaction videos dominated feeds. In one widely viewed clip, an ever-spirited Twitter user overlaid Karoline's quoted words onto a still of a somber crowd, captioning it with, "When truth speaks, even laughter must bow." Another series of TikTok montages compared Trevor's earlier, carefree quips from his old shows with his breakdown that evening, underscoring the stark transformation in public sentiment toward his humor. What had once been dismissed as merely edgy satire had now been recast as a symbol of irresponsibility. The collective digital judgment was swift and exacting. In online forums and comment sections, discussions evolved rapidly. Some denounced Trevor's previous jokes as callously out of touch, arguing that humor which demeans the sacrifices of veterans and ridicules the sincere expressions of faith could not be excused as just a joke. Others raised a defensive cry about preserving freedom of expression and the right of comedians to push boundaries. Yet even many staunch defenders of free speech found themselves pausing to reflect on Karoline Leavitt's pointed assertion that what built on others' suffering was a relinquishment of empathy, a sentiment that resonated deeply with a significant portion of the audience. Mainstream media barons and influential figures weighed in with impassioned statements. A well-known talk show host declared, "Tonight, we witnessed more than humor. We saw a reckoning. Public figures, especially those with vast platforms, must own their words." An editorial in a leading national newspaper described the incident as a turning point where the power of truth held the jester's mask hostage. Even political leaders, often reticent to comment on pop culture controversies, acknowledged that the debate had tapped into wider national concerns about accountability, respect, and the responsibilities inherent in free expression. In press conferences the following morning, Karoline Leavitt stood as a symbol of unyielding integrity. Journalists peppered her with questions about how the White House intended to respond to such an eruption of public discontent, particularly as it pertained to the wider responsibilities of political humor. "What we saw last night," one reporter argued, "was not just a heated debate, but a moral verdict delivered by millions of voices on the internet. It shows that society demands more from those who use satire as a weapon." Karoline acknowledged these sentiments, firmly reiterating her conviction that accountability was essential for any discourse, even that which was cloaked in humor. Meanwhile, Trevor Noah's production team scrambled to control the narrative. Some insiders revealed that discussions were already underway about putting his future engagements on hold until further review. Behind closed doors, heated debates took place about whether his contract should be suspended, or if he should be given an opportunity to apologize and reframe his approach to satire. Yet, despite these attempts at damage control, the image of his tear-stained exit had become indelibly etched into the public consciousness, a reminder that, in the era of social media, no public figure is entirely immune to instantaneous judgment. Academic circles and think tanks also began dissecting the incident. Panels were convened to debate the evolving standards of satire, and university classes on media ethics adopted the event as a case study in the intersection of free speech and public responsibility. Scholars argued that while humor is a vital form of expression, its power to shape cultural narratives demands that it be wielded with care. A seminar at a prestigious journalism school later that week was titled, "When the Punchline Fights Back: The Ethics of Political Satire in the Digital Age," drawing hundreds of participants eager to explore how a single broadcast could catalyze such expansive dialogue. As the digital storm settled into an ongoing conversation that reverberated across every medium, a broader realization emerged. The incident was not isolated. It was emblematic of a larger shift, a societal tightening around the edges of acceptable discourse, driven by an increasingly vocal collective that refused to tolerate the degradation of those who have suffered. Karoline Leavitt's steadfast demonstration of moral clarity had helped awaken a national debate about the true cost of humor when it comes at the expense of empathy and decency. For many of the millions watching from home, the evening had served as a clarion call. The power of words is no longer confined to the realm of the ephemeral and the fleeting. In today's interconnected world, every joke, every comment, Every remark made by those in positions of influence carries weight far beyond its immediate audience. The debate had transcended the boundaries of a live television show, seeping into the fabric of national consciousness and challenging everyone to reconsider what it means to speak responsibly in a time when truth can no longer be hidden behind a punchline. As the turbulent debate slowly drew to a close, the raw energy of the evening's events was still palpable across every corner of the studio. The fallout from Trevor's abrupt exit had not only transformed the tone of the broadcast, but had also ignited a broader conversation that reached far beyond the confines of the television set. In the days that followed, Karoline Leavitt became the unlikely emblem of a movement, a voice for the millions who believed that public figures must be held to a higher standard of accountability and empathy. In a follow-up press conference held in a slightly less ornate conference room at the White House, Karoline stood at a podium arranged with strategically placed American flags and muted, respectful lighting. Her demeanor was as composed as ever, yet there was a palpable intensity in her eyes, one that spoke of the courage it took to stand tall while her words reverberated with the weight of truth. Reporters from national networks, community leaders, and social justice activists had all gathered, their pens, voice recorders, and smartphones ready to capture every nuance of her message. Last night, we witnessed an event on live television that forced us all to re-examine the way we use humor talk to discuss hard truths. Karoline began, her voice clear and resonant. Humor, when used responsibly, can be an instrument of freedom and a catalyst for change. But when it dehumanizes those who have sacrificed so much, when it turns the heroic struggles of our veterans into mere fodder for cheap laughs, it is not only insensitive, it's a betrayal of our shared values. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Every word we utter on public platforms carries consequence, especially when those words stem from positions of privilege and influence. Public figures, whether they are entertainers or government officials, have a duty to reflect the dignity, compassion, and integrity that we expect from our society, she declared, her tone an unwavering call to responsibility. Tonight was a turning point, a definitive moment that showed us that when truth is masked by jokes, the cost is too steep. It is time for all of us to acknowledge that the power of fake laughter never substitutes for honest accountability. Karoline's address soon found its way into the weekly roundtables on talk shows and op-ed columns across every major newspaper. In lively discussions and symposiums across the nation, academics and cultural critics revisited the episode as a watershed moment in media discourse. Where once satire had been an untouchable realm for those who wielded humor as both shield and sword, now there was consensus that the boundaries of good taste must be redrawn. Social media erupted as well. Platforms that had been ablaze with heated debates the night after the incident witnessed an even stronger backlash in the days which followed. Memes, reaction GIFs, and viral videos of Karoline's measured discourse juxtaposed against clips of Trevor's disintegrated act underscored a shift in public sentiment. Influencers, comedians, activists, and celebrities alike weighed in on the responsibilities that come with a platform. Many expressed that while satire continues to be essential for free expression, it must also be tempered with a sense of humanity. A humanity that does not celebrate intolerance, mock sacrifice, or ridicule the sufferings of the vulnerable. As the conversations grew more widespread, grassroots community meetings sprang up in towns and cities across the country. In small community halls, local leaders organized forums in which citizens debated the ethical limits of humor in politics and the media. In these discussions, Karoline's speech emerged as a rallying cry for the redefinition of what it means to be humorous without being hurtful. People spoke movingly about the veterans who had lost limbs on distant battlefields, about the congregations who turned to faith as a refuge from tragedy, and about the conservative families whose voices had been drowned by a culture that sometimes mistook cynicism for humor. In one such town hall held in the very heartland of America, an elderly veteran raised his graying voice, saying, "I once fought not for praise, but for freedom, but I can't fathom the idea of my sacrifice being twisted into a punchline." His words, met with resounding applause, clearly captured a fundamental sentiment resonating across the nation. A deep yearning for decency, honesty, and respect. Even as Karoline continued to field questions from reporters, explaining that while satire is necessary for unearthing and challenging power, It must never come at the expense of dignity. There was a sense that the ideological battle was far from over. Yet, with every interview and every social media post, a new paradigm of accountability was taking shape. This paradigm was not about censoring humor, but about ensuring that the power of speech was used to uplift rather than demean. It was about fostering a culture where respect for human sacrifice was non-negotiable, and where every public figure understood the transformative, far-reaching impact of their words. In various public forums, lawyers specializing in media ethics, political theorists, and even comedians redefined the very notion of safe humor. Their collaborative discussions led to the tentative conclusion that while free expression should remain inviolable, it must be paired with earnest responsibility. The mantra emerged: truth cannot be a punchline. Protests, editorials, and viral online petitions converged to make it clear that the voice of humor must always harmonize with the melody of compassion. The controversy ultimately marked the beginning of a new era. What had started as a heated exchange during a politically charged broadcast evolved into an influential symbol of resistance against hypocrisy. Karoline's measured stance, humble yet forthright, inspired countless individuals to stand up to those who had, for too long, disguised contempt as comedy. And as the nation collectively turned its gaze to its public figures, a quiet but potent revolution of words, values, and collective conscience was already underway. It became evident that while Trevor had walked away, unable to bear the weight of laughing at a truth that had cut too deeply, Karoline remained. Not as an adversary, but as a champion for those millions whose voices had long been muffled by careless amusement. Her unwavering commitment to speak the truth, to hold everyone accountable for the implications of their rhetoric, had redefined the landscape of political discourse. Karoline had not only defied hypocrisy, she had illuminated a path forward, a path where every public statement was a pledge to honor the dignity of every human soul. He walked off the set because he couldn't laugh at the truth, and she remained not as an opponent, but as a woman who dared to say what millions have longed to hear. Subscribe if you believe that words matter.